My name is Madeline Fern Whitaker, and last Christmas my daughter-in-law leaned close to me amid laughter and clinking glasses and whispered a secret that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. But this story doesn't start there. It starts with a quiet house, the kind that creaks when the wind moves through it and smells faintly of pine and old books. A place where I've lived for over 4 decades, long enough for the wood to remember my footsteps and the windows to frame every season of my life. I'm 72 years old. I used to teach literature poetry mostly before I retired. I never shouted in my classroom. I found that the quietest voice often carried the most weight. And that was true in life too. My husband Everett was louder. Not cruel, just grand. The kind of man who filled a room and seemed to expect applause for it. I used to admire that. We had one son, Michael. A good boy, quiet like me. Sensitive. Or at least he was before marriage carved something colder into him. He married Lauren 3 years ago. She was beautiful, glacial articulate, always perfectly dressed and too poised for her age. She reminded me of expensive perfume. Lovely from afar, but too much if you stayed too close too long. They lived in Boston, but every holiday they'd drive up here to Vermont. Our house became the backdrop of Christmas-lit candles, roasted ham and carols humming low from the record player. It should have been peaceful. It used to be, until it wasn't. That particular Christmas, the one before, everything collapsed. Something was off. You know how a room can feel different even when nothing's visibly changed. Lauren hugged me longer than usual when she arrived. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. And Michael, he barely looked at me. I chalked it up to holiday stress. But the dinner was perfect. My pine nut stuffing cranberry orange relish Lauren's signature pear tart. Wine was poured freely. Everett told that same story about the time he got locked in the school supply closet in '82. Everyone laughed except Lauren. She smiled at him, nodded, but there was something in her gaze I couldn't place. Reverent. No, something else. Something colder. I caught it again when Everett reached across the table to pass her the gravy. His hand lingered on hers a second too long. I almost told myself I imagined it. Almost. When the pie was served, I noticed Michael staring at his phone under the table. Not scrolling, just staring, like he was holding his breath. He'd done that before years ago when he thought he was failing a class and couldn't tell us. That familiar anxiety in his shoulders, it was back. But I wasn't sure why. And then it happened. Lauren leaned toward me while everyone was laughing about the whipped cream Everett had accidentally flicked onto his tie. She touched my hand gently and smiled. I'm pregnant, she whispered, her voice warm like silk sliding over a knife. With your husband's child. The room froze for a moment, at least in my mind. The clinking glasses blurred. The laughter turned into static. The lights on the tree behind her twinkled like they were mocking me. I didn't flinch. Didn't pull my hand away. I looked at her. Just looked. She smiled a fraction too long, and then turned back to her pear tart like she hadn't just detonated a bomb. And I took a sip of my wine. Cabernet, a good year. You might think a woman like me would scream. Stand. Shatter the crystal glasses. Confront the man she gave her entire adult life to. But I'd read enough novels. I'd taught enough Shakespeare. I knew how revenge worked. It never moved in haste. It simmered. I excused myself early that night. Told them I was tired. Kissed Michael on the cheek. Told Everett I'd leave the dishes till morning. Then I went upstairs, sat in the dark, and I wrote down her words in my notebook. Word for word. And the date. December 24th, 9:17 p.m. Because if she thought I would forget, she didn't know me at all. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was devastated, though. Yes, something inside me cracked, but because the gears in my mind had already started turning. I sat by the window in my room watching snow collect on the branches like silence settling in. Lauren's words replayed in my head, not like a scream, but like a whisper that grew sharper each time it echoed. I'm pregnant. With your husband's child. She wanted to break me, or maybe she wanted to test me. Either way, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. At 5 in the morning, I made coffee. Strong, bitter, the kind Everett never liked. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the locked drawer in my old desk and pulled out the notebook I used to write in during my teaching days. It was leather-bound, the edges frayed, the pages yellowing. I hadn't written in it since Michael left for college. Page 1. I wrote her name, Lauren Whitaker. Page 2. Whispered confession. Deck 24, 9, 17 p.m. Then I turned to a fresh page and started a new section. Patterns. Because the truth I knew never existed in isolation. It needed context. And Lauren's whisper was just the first puzzle piece. Over the next few days, I became an expert in invisibility. I moved like a shadow through the house, present but never noticed. I paid attention to what others missed. Everett's new cologne I'd never seen before, Lauren's scarf in our downstairs bathroom, Michael's silence growing more cavernous by the hour. The day after Christmas, I cleaned the guest bathroom myself. Lauren usually left her things scattered, but this time it was too clean, wiped, sanitized, as if trying to erase something. On a whim, I checked the linen basket. One of the hand towels had a single silvery strand of hair. Lauren's hair is a deep auburn. Mine is white. Everett's, what's left of it, is gray. But this wasn't gray. It was blonde. Platinum. Almost silver. And long. Everett's hair hasn't been long in decades. I took the towel, folded it carefully, and slid it into a Ziploc bag. You see, I used to lead a forensic science elective. We studied trace evidence, DNA, even basic hair follicle analysis. That course never felt particularly useful. Until now. The next step was subtle. Observation. I noticed Everett had changed his phone's lock code. He never used to lock it at all. He also started keeping it face down on the counter. A new habit. I watched him glance at it more frequently, nervously, like someone waiting for a text they didn't want to receive. Lauren called me 3 times in January. Not to chat, just to ask questions that didn't feel like conversations, more like checking if I knew anything. And Michael, he never called. Instead, one evening in February, I got an anonymous floral delivery, white roses, my favorite. No card. Everett said, "Maybe someone's thanking you for Christmas dinner." But I hadn't told anyone those were my favorite. Not even Lauren. By March, I'd built a small archive in my desk. Printouts of texts I'd seen Everett half type then delete. A receipt from a boutique hotel 30 minutes outside Boston. 2 guests one night. I knew his handwriting. I knew he'd signed it. But I said nothing. Not even when he came home late 3 nights in a row, blaming traffic when the roads had been clear all week. I waited. In April, I made a quiet visit to a private DNA testing service. I brought the towel. And a hairbrush Lauren left behind. I didn't say why. I just smiled. Paid in cash. 2 weeks later, the results came back. The hair on the towel matched Lauren's sample. And the DNA embedded in that strand, it held markers not shared with Everett's. I still had Everett's old toothbrush from when he stayed overnight at the hospital years ago. I sent that in too, not a match. In other words, whoever fathered Lauren's child, it wasn't Everett. But that didn't absolve him. Because it meant only one thing. She lied. And the only reason you whisper a lie like that to a woman like me is if you're trying to destroy her. So now the question was why? Why tell such a cruel untruth unless there was a deeper truth she wanted to bury beneath it? I turned back to my notebook. New page. New heading. Motive. And I kept watching. By summer, Lauren had begun dropping hints that they were thinking of moving in with us temporarily just while they figured out the next chapter. Michael was in between jobs, she said. Everett seemed overly enthusiastic about the idea, but I said nothing. She thought I was fragile. They all did. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And by next Christmas, I'd make sure no one would mistake the difference again. The summer passed slowly, like a long inhale before a scream. Lauren called more frequently now. Not to speak with me, of course. Her words were directed at Everett. She'd ask about the weather up here, what furniture we still had in the guest room, if the hot water heater was still temperamental. It was theater dressed as politeness, masked as planning. And Everett, he played along. More than that, he seemed pleased. "It might be nice to have them close," he said one morning, sipping his coffee. He always said that, close, as if proximity would mend whatever had fractured long ago between him and Michael. But closeness, I knew, was not always about love. Sometimes it was about access. What about the baby? I asked, pretending curiosity. Everett looked surprised. What about it? I just thought, maybe they'd want their own space. For privacy. He shrugged. Lauren said she likes it here. She says it feels stable. Stable. Like a fortress waiting to be claimed. I began to wonder if this had all been about the house. Our house. The only thing Everett and I truly built together. Lauren was sharp. She didn't just want status, she wanted position. And if she couldn't have it through her husband, she'd take it through mine. But she underestimated me. In August, I called a lawyer, quietly, discreetly. His name was Daniel Cho, a former student of mine from decades ago, now practicing estate law. I remembered him as brilliant, serious, always sitting in the front row. I need to make some changes to my will, I said. He met me in a quiet cafe in Montpellier, far from home, and listened without judgment as I laid out my concerns. Not accusations, just observations. I want to ensure that if anything happens to me, the house doesn't go to Michael automatically. Not while he's confused. Daniel nodded slowly. Confused. Yes, I said. Let's call it that. We rewrote the will with surgical precision. The house would pass to a trust in my name controlled by a board of 3, my cousin Eleanor Daniel himself and my neighbor Ruth. People with no stake in my son's marriage. And if I passed away, the house would not be sold, but maintained until such time that my grandson, if he was ever born, reached the age of 25. Only then could it be transferred. It's unusual, Daniel said, handing me the pen. I've always preferred the unusual, I replied. By September, Everett began going into town more often. Groceries, he said. Or pharmacy. Once he said he was meeting an old friend for coffee, though I knew that friend had died in 2019. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on the phone. Everett wasn't tech-savvy. He didn't realize his messages were backing up to the family iCloud, which through an old, forgotten password I had stored in a drawer, gave me access. And what I found, they weren't just meeting in hotels. Lauren and Everett were texting constantly. Coded language, but not enough to disguise it. The cabin's beautiful today. Next time, bring that blue shirt I like. Do you think she suspects? She. That's all I was, now a pronoun. A shadow in their path. But I still didn't confront him. You might wonder how I stayed so calm. The answer is simple. I had a plan. And when you have a plan, you don't panic. In October, I hosted a small dinner. Just Everett, Michael, Lauren, and me. I served roast duck with orange glaze, wild rice, and a bottle of wine Everett had been saving. Midway through the meal, I brought out a box. I found this in the attic, I said casually. Photos from when Michael was little. They all smiled politely. Lauren reached first. She always did. Inside were old Polaroids, faded notes, even a locket I thought I'd lost. But tucked beneath them was a photo I'd printed off Everett's phone. Just one. It showed him and Lauren seated too close on a park bench, his hand on her thigh, her mouth near his neck. Not overtly scandalous, but damning. I didn't say a word. I just watched. Lauren blinked. Her hand hovered. She carefully tucked the photo back inside and closed the lid. Michael never saw it. But Everett did. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. I smiled. Funny. The things we find when we clean up the past. Later that night, I burned the photo. I didn't need it anymore. The real gift was the silence it left behind. By November, Lauren was visibly pregnant. She called to say they'd be arriving for Christmas on the 23rd. Michael didn't speak during the call. When I hung up, Everett asked, "Are you sure you want to do all the work this year?" I looked at him, really looked, and said, "Absolutely." Because this time, I wasn't just hosting Christmas. I was staging an execution. December 23rd. The driveway crunched under their tires, just as dusk settled, pale gold light spilling across the snowbanks. I stood on the porch with my scarf drawn tight, smiling like any devoted mother would. Lauren stepped out of the car first, radiant in her calculated way. Her coat fitted perfectly over her now prominent belly. Michael followed behind her, carrying the bags. He looked thinner, paler. There were shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "Hi, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Welcome home," I replied. Everett emerged from the den, cheerful and loud. His booming voice echoed through the house as he embraced Lauren longer than he needed to. She laughed at something he whispered. I pretended not to hear, but I noticed. That night, as they settled in, I laid out their towels in the guest bathroom and placed gift boxes at the foot of each guest's bed, each one perfectly wrapped in silver paper tied with crimson ribbon. Michael's box had a handwritten tag. To my son with love, Everett's. To my husband for all the years together. Lauren's, to the mother-to-be, and mine. It waited quietly under the tree. Unlabeled, unopened, but ready. Dinner on Christmas Eve was warm, polite, filled with the usual clinking of glasses and meaningless conversation. Lauren recounted stories from her prenatal appointments. Everett made toasts. Michael sat quietly, occasionally glancing at his wife, then at his father, then down at his plate. He looked like a man being slowly buried alive by his own silence. After dessert, I insisted on a family photo. We stood in front of the fireplace. I arranged everyone: Everett to the left, Lauren to the right, Michael between them. I stood slightly apart off-center. The timer blinked. The camera clicked. A perfect portrait of betrayal. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room after everyone had gone to bed. The house was quiet save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock and the faint hum of the Christmas tree lights. I poured myself a glass of port and opened my notebook one last time. I checked the boxes beside each item. DNA test results. Affidavit from Daniel. Photo evidence. Message backups. Handwritten confession not from Lauren Everett months ago, drunk apologizing for the mess I've made. Everything was in place, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt ready. The next morning, I woke early. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine. Snow was falling gently outside. Everything looked exactly like it should on Christmas morning, except everything had changed. I set the table, made hot chocolate from scratch, the way Michael used to like it, poured eggnog for Everett, warmed croissants, lit the fire. By 9 a.m., everyone was gathered. Lauren descended the stairs in a flowing cream robe, her hand gently resting on her belly. Everett kissed her cheek, murmured something that made her laugh again. Michael followed a few paces behind, silent as ever. "Merry Christmas," I said, passing out the gift boxes. They looked surprised. "I thought we'd open mine first," I said, gesturing to the unlabeled one beneath the tree. "But I'd like you to open yours together. It's a family theme this year." They unwrapped their boxes in unison. Michael opened his first. A series of printed emails between Everett and Lauren, dates, timestamps, subject lines. He frowned, confused, then pale. Everett's hands shook slightly as he untied the ribbon. Inside his box, a printed copy of the hotel receipt and a small audio recorder labeled March 12th, porch conversation. I knew he'd recognize it. I'd recorded their conversation from the kitchen window. Lauren opened hers last. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her own signature from a prenatal lab document, and beside it, the DNA results I'd received weeks earlier. The test confirming the father wasn't Everett. Her eyes flitted across the paper, then up to me. Her mouth opened, then closed. Nobody spoke. Not yet. Michael finally found his voice. What is this?" Everett looked at me like I'd reached across the table and stabbed him in the chest. Lauren stood. "This is insane. You went through our things. You've been spying." "I've been watching," I said softly. "Not spying. Watching." Everett finally spoke. This isn't what it looks like." "No," I said. "It never is." Lauren's hands were shaking now. "These tests, they don't mean anything." "They mean you lied," I said, still calm. "Not just to me. To him." I turned to Michael. "She told me she was pregnant with your father's child. At this table. Last year." Michael's breath caught. "What?" "She told me while you were laughing about whipped cream," I said. "You laughed and I was dying inside." Silence. And then the moment broke. Michael stood, threw his chair back. "You said you needed space, that we needed time to heal. And all this time you were..." He turned to Everett. "Dad, are you even going to deny it?" Everett tried, stammered, but no words came. Lauren's voice was rising, desperate now. "This is a witch hunt," She's manipulating you? No, I said again. I'm just reminding you who raised the man you lied to. Lauren stepped back. You can't prove. I don't have to. Because you already did. I pointed to her own letter, her own test, her own notes tucked into her purse that I'd found weeks ago while she was visiting the nursery room. I hadn't stolen. I'd borrowed. Photographed. Preserved. The truth wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror, and I had just held it up. No one said another word. The fire crackled in the hearth. The lights on the tree blinked in soft, steady patterns. Then Everett stood, walked out of the room. Michael sat down, his hands in his lap. Lauren remained standing, stunned. I took a final sip of my coffee. "Merry Christmas," I said. Lauren didn't leave immediately. She stood in that room like a statue carved from pride, panic flickering behind her eyes as if searching for a script that had suddenly changed. Her lips parted, perhaps to protest, to deny, to recast herself in a more flattering role, but nothing came out. Because deep down she knew. The show was over. I watched her stare at the evidence again. Her own handwriting, Everett's texts, the DNA report, all coldly factual and inescapable. This wasn't some emotional outburst or vindictive accusation. This was data, and it was damning. She turned to Michael, who was hunched over the table, the paper in his hand, trembling. "Michael," she said, her voice suddenly fragile like lace tearing. "You can't actually believe this. Your mother's always hated me." Michael didn't look up. "I never hated you," I said. "I just never trusted the way you twisted sincerity into strategy." Her eyes snapped to mine. "I'd hit the target." "I was young," she said, a touch defensive. "I made mistakes." "You weren't young when you whispered that filth into my ear last Christmas." I said, my voice low, but steady. "You were calculated and cruel. You wanted to destroy something." Because I thought. She stopped herself. I leaned in slightly. "You thought what?" She looked away. That was when I saw it, the flicker, a flash of something beneath the surface. Regret. No. Just fear. Fear of losing control. And it was slipping fast. From upstairs we heard a door open. Footsteps. Everett descending the stairs with a suitcase in hand. He didn't look at me. Didn't look at Michael. Just walked past us all as if leaving a dinner party early. Shoulders slumped with cowardice masquerading as dignity. Everett, Lauren called after him, voice cracking. "You can't just leave me here." He paused, but only for a breath. Then he stepped out the door and into the December cold. Michael stood slowly, walked to the window, watched his father's car reverse down the snowy drive. Then he turned around and faced her. "You told me you were over him," he said quietly. "You told me everything you wanted was with me." "I do want you," she said, approaching him. "Michael," I was confused. "And your father, he was the one who kept pushing." "No," he interrupted. "I read the messages." "You pushed." He followed. Her eyes filled with tears. Not the kind that come from heartbreak. The kind that rise from self-preservation. But Michael didn't move toward her. Didn't comfort her. He just looked exhausted. "I can't do this," he whispered. And then he left too. He didn't pack a bag. Just took his coat and keys and stepped out into the snow, leaving the front door wide open in the bitter air. For a long moment it was just Lauren and me. Two women at war. One defeated. One done pretending. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I replied. "This makes me whole." She laughed short, hollow. "You're going to die alone, you know that." I stood, picked up her unopened tea from the tray, poured it slowly into the sink behind me. "I've already been alone," I said. "But now I'm free." She didn't respond. Didn't apologize. Just grabbed her purse and stormed out the wind, slamming the door behind her so hard it shook the Christmas wreath loose from its hook. It landed face down on the floor. Fitting. I took my time cleaning up, gathered the ribbons folded, the boxes even wiped down the table. The fire had died down to glowing embers. The tree lights blinked quietly, indifferent to the storm they'd witnessed. By the time I sat back down with my port, the house was utterly still again. I reached under the tree and pulled out the last box, mine, the one I hadn't labeled. Inside was a single photograph. Me holding baby Michael in this same living room decades ago. The Christmas lights behind us blurred and glowing. Everett had taken the photo back when we still believed in permanence. I stared at it, smiled, then gently placed the photo on the mantel. Some stories don't need to be erased, just replaced. The days after Christmas passed in slow, deliberate quiet. No one called, no one returned. The house for once wasn't filled with obligations. No dinner plans to manage, no schedules to coordinate, no invisible dance of avoidance and unspoken tension. Just stillness, crisp morning light on snow, the slow hum of the heater, the faint scent of cinnamon lingering in the kitchen air, and me free at last from the weight of pretending. I expected grief to arrive like a cold tide. After all, I'd just destroyed the family I'd spent a lifetime holding together. But what I felt wasn't grief. It was clarity, sharp, clean, like ice in the lungs. I didn't feel like a villain. I felt awake. The neighborhood, of course, had questions. Ruth from next door knocked the day after Christmas bearing a tin of lemon cookies and a dozen unspoken inquiries behind her polite smile. "Quiet holiday this year?" she asked, peering past me into the calm hallway. I smiled back. "The quietest." She handed me the cookies and left without pressing. Ruth had always known better than to pry. That was one of the reasons she was on the trust I'd arranged with Daniel. Women like her understood that dignity often wore silence like armor. A few days later, I received a certified letter. It was from Everett. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity outweighed resentment. Inside was a brief typed note. No apology, no explanations. Just a single request. A signed waiver removing him from any claim to the house. Attached was a notarized draft of the waiver pre-signed by him. Typical Everett. Even in defeat, he wanted to pretend he'd walked away. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The trust had already made it impossible for him to touch the property. He was simply attempting to rewrite his exit. Let him. What surprised me, though, was the envelope that arrived 2 days later. From Michael. It was handwritten. Careful. No return address. Mom, I don't know where to begin. I guess I've always known something wasn't right. With her. With him. With all of it? But I didn't want to believe it. I thought if I ignored it long enough, the truth would disappear. "I'm sorry you had to be the one to carry it. To prove it. To suffer alone in your own home. I've moved out. I'm staying with an old friend in Portland. I'm not sure what happens next, but I'm going to be a father soon, and I refuse to build a lie for that child to live in. Thank you. For not screaming, for watching, for being the only one brave enough to see. I love you, Michael." I read the letter twice, then again, and again. It didn't heal the wound, but it softened it. I folded it neatly, placed it between the pages of my old notebook, the one that had documented every betrayal, every clue, every quiet scream. It felt like the last chapter. The next morning, I made myself a real breakfast for the first time in weeks. French toast with extra cinnamon. The way I used to make it for Michael on snow days. I ate slowly, watching the snow fall through the kitchen window, letting the warmth of the fire behind me wrap around my shoulders. Then I opened the door to the guest room. It smelled faintly of her perfume, but only faintly. I stripped the bed, washed every sheet, every pillow, vacuumed the floors, wiped down every surface. It was a ritual of reclamation. When I finished, I stood in the center of the room and said aloud, "This is mine again." And it was. That evening, I lit the fire again, poured a small glass of port, and turned on the old record player. Nat King Cole's. The Christmas song filled the air, soft, nostalgic, bittersweet. I stood in front of the mantel and looked at the photo I'd placed there, the one of young me holding baby Michael. Behind us, the very tree that stood in the corner now. The same woman, but not the same. The past year had hollowed something out, but not in the way fire hollows a house. More like the way water carves a canyon, slowly, quietly, but irrevocably. I'd been reformed, not into someone harder, just sharper. That night, I didn't lock the doors. I wasn't afraid. There was no one left to betray me, and that was a gift I'd given myself. New Year's Eve arrived without ceremony. There were no invitations to answer, no champagne flutes waiting to be filled. Just me, the wind outside, whistling low through the pine trees, and the steady tick of the old mantel clock, counting down the final hours of a year that had unspooled, like a secret confession. I didn't mind the solitude. In fact, I embraced it. I'd spent so many years orchestrating holidays for other people's comfort, managing everyone else's expectations while tucking away my own disappointments like loose threads. But not this year. This year, every choice was mine, and I savored that power. I poured myself a small glass of scotch and sat by the window watching snow fall in slow spirals. The kind of snowfall that erases the past from rooftops and driveways, granting everything a temporary blankness. A quiet forgiveness. That's when I heard it. A knock at the door. I froze. Not from fear, but surprise. Few people ever visited unannounced. And certainly not on a night like this. I opened the door slowly, the cold rushing in like a gasp. It was Lauren. She stood there wrapped in a coat far too thin for the weather. Her face was pale. Her makeup smeared just enough to make her look undone. She was alone. I said nothing. She didn't wait to be invited in. She stepped inside like a shadow creeping across a floor. I just wanted to say something, she said, arms folded tight. And I won't take long. I remained silent, gesturing only toward the fire. She sat clutching her coat closed as if still cold even inside. I lost everything, she began. The apartment. The job. Michael won't answer my calls. He canceled the joint account. I didn't nod. I didn't react. She stared into the fire. I didn't come here to ask for anything. I know that ship sailed. Then why are you here? I asked, my voice even. She hesitated. Because I don't know who I am without the lie. I watched her closely. I've built my entire life on how I'm perceived. Always the smartest in the room. The most poised. I thought if I could control the narrative, I could control the outcome. And the people in it, I added. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. Yes, there it was. Admission. The honesty came slowly like blood from a reluctant wound. She spoke of childhood expectations, the mother who demanded perfection, the years spent learning how to weaponize charm, and how Everett, aging and foolish, was just another pawn in her game. I told you that lie, she said, finally, voice, almost breaking, about the baby being his. Because I wanted to hurt you. I wanted to win something. Anything. And I thought you were weak enough to break. I sipped my scotch. You were wrong. She looked up. I know. We sat in silence, the fire popping gently between us. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing footprints, smoothing edges. I'll leave now, she said, standing. But before she reached the door, I asked, what's the baby's name? She paused. I haven't decided yet. Then do better, I said. Let that child be the first honest thing you've ever brought into this world. She turned eyes glassy. I'll try. Then she left. And I let her. I returned to my chair, refilled my glass, and turned my gaze back to the window. Midnight was near. Somewhere in the village, I could hear faint fireworks cracking the silence. I didn't celebrate, but I did smile. Because I realized something in that moment. I hadn't just survived the betrayal. I'd reshaped it into something immovable, something true. And from that truth, a new kind of power had emerged, not the loud, righteous kind, but the kind that lives in knowing you no longer owe anyone anything. When the clock struck 12, I whispered 3 words into the quiet. Never again, Madeline. Then I raised my glass, not to the future, but to the woman who refused to stay silent. January rolled in like fog, slow, soundless, and gray. The decorations were still up, garlands of pine along the staircase, white lights on the tree, but their purpose had faded. They felt more like artifacts now, remnants of a battlefield dressed in ribbons. I left them there for weeks, not out of laziness, but because I wanted to sit with the contrast, the way beauty could live in the same space as betrayal, the way a home could glow with candles and yet still hide rot in its foundation. That juxtaposition had become oddly comforting. On the 3rd of January, Ruth came by again. She didn't bring cookies this time. Instead, she held a large white envelope. I believe this is yours, she said. Inside was a handwritten note and a check, Lauren's handwriting. The note was brief. Madeline, thank you for the truth. I don't have much, but this is what I owed you for the nursery furniture and the repairs you paid for last spring without telling anyone. You were never weak, just quiet. And I'm sorry I mistook one for the other. Lauren, The check was modest, more symbolic than substantial, but I appreciated the gesture not because of the money, but because it was the first thing she'd given me that hadn't been laced with manipulation. I set it aside and returned to my breakfast. That evening, I began the slow process of taking down the Christmas tree, one ornament at a time. Each one a memory: Michael's macaroni snowman from kindergarten, Everett's glass reindeer from a Vermont holiday market. I hesitated with that one, then dropped it, let it shatter on the hardwood. It didn't feel vengeful, just necessary. By the time I reached the star at the top, I realized something strange. I wasn't sad. I was curious about who I might become next. For so long, I'd played the role of mother, wife, peacekeeper, silent observer. But with all those roles burned down to ash, what was left behind wasn't emptiness. It was possibility. That week, I found myself rearranging furniture. Nothing drastic, just small shifts. A chair turned toward the window instead of the fireplace. The old writing desk moved from the attic to the sunroom. I dusted off my typewriter, placed fresh paper inside, and sat down. I hadn't written for pleasure in years. Now it flowed. Not fiction, not memoir, something between the two. I began to write about a woman who vanished herself from the life others assumed for her, who slipped out of the roles they had cast and quietly wrote a new script. One that didn't require an audience. Sometimes I wrote until midnight, sometimes just a single paragraph. But every word felt like a reclamation. Around the same time, I began noticing small changes in my body. Not deterioration, though. Age brings its reminders, but lightness. My shoulders didn't ache the way they used to. My breath felt less tight. I stopped clenching my jaw at night. I hadn't realized how long I'd been carrying tension like it was part of my anatomy. One afternoon, I went for a walk through the woods behind the house. The snow was ankle-deep, soft and fresh. I paused at the old oak tree where Michael used to build forts, and I knelt, brushing snow away from the stone he once carved our initials into when he was 10. MW plus MW. Madeline and Michael Whitaker. A mother and son. Still there. Still intact. He hadn't come back, not yet. But his letter had been enough. It told me he was waking up too. That maybe he'd learn eventually that not all family is defined by blood or ceremony, but by truth, and who's willing to stand in it with you. When I returned home, there was another letter in the mailbox. From Daniel Cho, my lawyer. He confirmed the updates to my estate plan had been executed. The house was officially placed in the trust. The accounts split. The safeguards locked in. No one can touch what you've built, he wrote. Not anymore. I stood in the foyer, letter in hand, and whispered to myself, good. That night, I built a small fire, poured tea instead of scotch, and lit one candle on the mantel. A new ritual, not to remember them, but to honor me, the woman who saw everything, and said nothing until it mattered most. February arrived under a veil of silence, not the oppressive kind, but a welcomed hush, the kind that settles after a storm when the trees stop groaning and the wind no longer has anything to prove. The house felt different now. Not emptier, but more honest. It breathed easier without secrets lodged in the walls. I did too. I kept writing, every morning at 7. Stira. I'd sit by the sunroom window with a mug of black tea and commit words to the page. My notebook, once a tool of observation, had become something more sacred. A confessional, a witness, a blueprint of reclamation. Then mid-February, Michael came home. Not for good. Not with bags in hand or apologies rehearsed. Just a visit. I saw his car from the kitchen window, tires crunching the thin layer of ice that still clung to the driveway. He stepped out slowly, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the porch like he wasn't sure if he belonged. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom," he said, tentative. "Hi, sweetheart." He stepped in, eyes adjusting to the warm dimness of the house. "Smells like cinnamon." "It always does," I replied. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured him a cup of tea, pushed the sugar bowl toward him the way I always had. He didn't take any. "I moved into a studio," he said. "Downtown Portland. It's small but quiet." "That's good," I said. "And the baby's due in May." I nodded. "Boy or girl?" "Girl." There was a pause between us, soft and weighty. "She's healthy. Lauren's, well, she's doing the best she can." I studied his face. He looked older, not from age, but from what life had carved through him. There were grooves of disillusionment beneath his eyes, but also something clearer. The fog had lifted. At least a little. I wanted to say thank you, he said. For everything. For not tearing us apart when you had every reason to. I met his gaze. I didn't protect you by staying silent. I protected you by waiting for you to see it for yourself. He swallowed hard. And I did. God, Mom, I did. He looked down at his hands as if ashamed of what they'd let go, what they'd tried to hold on to. I've been thinking, he continued, about the house, about the trust. I know what you did. Daniel told me. I did what had to be done. He nodded. And I want you to know I support it. Completely. Relief wasn't the right word for what I felt. It was more like release. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. You're still my son, I said. That never changed. Tears brimmed in his eyes, but he blinked them away. I don't know how to be a father, he whispered. No one does, I said. But if you're honest, if you listen more than you speak, and if you teach her the difference between charm and character, you'll be just fine. He nodded again slowly, then asked, Would you help? When the baby comes. I was quiet for a moment. Not as a favor, he added quickly. Not as a babysitter or a backup plan, but as her grandmother. I smiled. I'd like that. We didn't talk much more after that. We didn't need to. He stayed for another hour helping me replace the batteries in the smoke detector, taking out the recycling without being asked. Small quiet tasks. The kind you only do when you want to repair what's been broken. When he left, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the road. This time my heart didn't ache when he was gone. It steadied. That night, I sat at my writing desk and penned a letter. To my granddaughter. You don't know me yet, but I knew you long before your first breath. Your mother once whispered a lie that nearly shattered us, but your father found the truth. And that truth is what built the space you'll grow up in. You are not the product of their sins. You are the proof that new stories can begin. And I promise no one will ever write yours for you. Your grandmother, Madeline. I folded the letter, sealed it, and tucked it into the same notebook that had recorded the ruin. One day when she was old enough, I would give it to her. Not to teach her what to fear, but to remind her of what to become. By March, the snow had melted into soft mud and stubborn puddles, and the first crocus buds pierced the ground like tiny rebellions against winter. I began leaving the windows open during the day, just a crack, to let the air change. I wanted the scent of cold wood and ghosts to be replaced with something real. Earth, rain, rebirth. And every morning the sunroom filled with light again, not just from the sun, but from me. I was different now, not entirely healed. There were scars that still pulsed when I ran my fingers across them, but I was whole. And that was more than I'd been in years. On the first Saturday of the month, I went into town. I hadn't in a while. I'd become used to the rhythm of solitude. No interruptions, no small talk. But on that morning, I wanted to see people face his life. I wanted to be reminded that the world hadn't ended just because my personal illusions had. The local market was bustling with early spring energy. Teenagers handing out flyers for a community theater production. An elderly couple arguing playfully over what type of honey to buy. A little girl asking her mother if daffodils smelled like sunshine. I wandered the aisles slowly, taking in everything. At the bakery stall, I ran into Eleanor, my cousin, one of the trustees on the house trust. She looked me over as if searching for damage. You look taller, she said. I feel it. She nodded, then asked quietly, Have you heard from him? Michael. I replied, Yes. He's finding his footing. And her. I shook my head. I'm not her mother. Eleanor handed me a small bag of lemon scones. These are for you. No charge. I didn't. You've paid in full, she said gently. I returned home with the scones, a fresh bouquet of tulips, and a sense that I had finally stepped out of a house that had once been my prison and was now my cathedral. That night, I rearranged the photos in the hallway. I took down the ones that felt dishonest, the posed smiles, the sterile holiday portraits, the ones where I remembered the betrayal lurking just beyond the frame. Instead, I placed new ones. A photo of me and Michael when he was 5 baking muffins. A candid of me laughing with Ruth over a spilled teacup. A recent shot of my sunroom desk mid-project pages fluttering in the breeze. Truthful moments. Not perfect, but mine. Then I went to the attic. It had been months since I'd ventured up there. Dust hung in the air like memories too heavy to fall. I pulled out a box marked Everett College Years and another labeled Lauren, Wedding Plans. Both had sat there untouched since their respective chapters were written. I carried them downstairs. One by one, I laid the contents on the dining table. Photos, letters, programs, receipts, one of Everett's old cufflinks, a dried rose Lauren had pressed between pages of a bridal magazine. I stared at these artifacts not with anger but with detachment. They were fossils now, proof that once I'd believed in something that had long since decomposed. Then with slow ceremony I fed them to the fire, not all at once, each piece with its own pause, its own goodbye. The cufflink, the photo of Everett with Lauren at the wedding rehearsal, the invitation with gold foil script, a note Everett once wrote me in college promising to always choose you. Smoke curled up the chimney like absolution. I saved only one item, a photograph of Michael and me on his high school graduation day. He wasn't smiling, neither was I, but our hands were clasped tightly like two people tethered not by performance, but by survival. Later that evening, as I tidied up, my eyes landed on the gift boxes I had stored away after Christmas, the ones I'd carefully wrapped and placed beneath the tree that fateful night. I had saved them, not for nostalgia, but because they represented something bigger. They weren't weapons. They were truth wrapped in ribbon. I opened one again, carefully feeling the crisp fold of paper I had reinserted after the confrontation. Inside was Everett's printed email to Lauren. Short, suggestive, arrogant. So many betrayals packed into a handful of digital words. I folded it, placed it back, then finally walked to the garbage bin and dropped the entire box inside. I didn't need it anymore. The truth had already done its work. Now it could rest. And so could I. Spring arrived in earnest, and with it came the slow unfurling of everything I'd buried during the winter. Grief, relief, resentment, forgiveness. Like thawed ground exposing what had once been frozen, my heart began to soften in places I didn't expect. I started gardening again. At first it was small clearing weeds, trimming dead branches, preparing the soil. But as the days stretched longer and the light grew stronger, so did my appetite for creating. I planted tulips and rosemary along the edges and a cherry tree in the side yard. A tree for beginnings, for roots that belonged only to me. One morning in April, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small velvet box and a single sheet of folded paper. The handwriting was Everett's. Madeline, you'll never believe this, but I bought this for you the week before last Christmas. I had planned to give it to you at dinner that night, before everything happened. It doesn't make up for anything. I know that, but it was the first time in years I remembered why I loved you. You were always the only person in the room I couldn't lie to. I'm sorry. E. Inside the box was a necklace. Simple. Silver. A delicate pendant shaped like a fountain pen nibby. I recognized the design instantly. Everett had seen me admiring it at a local craft fair months before. I had passed it by saying it was too sentimental. He had remembered. I didn't cry. Instead, I placed the necklace on my vanity and left it there unworn. Not as a rejection, but as a reminder. Remorse and repair are not the same. Still, I appreciated the gesture. Even broken clocks, after all, tell the truth twice a day. That afternoon, I wrote Everett a letter. Everett, thank you for the gift. It was thoughtful. I hope you are doing the work, not just the performance of apology, but the excavation. I do not hate you. But I am no longer willing to shrink myself in the name of harmony. I've learned that peace and silence are not interchangeable. May you find one without mistaking it for the other. Madeline. I didn't mail it. I burned it in the same fireplace that had consumed our wedding photos. It was a message meant only for me to be written, acknowledged, and released. A week later, Michael called. Not just a message. A real call. Mom, he said, voice warm. I have someone who wants to meet you. He didn't have to say her name. I knew. We made plans. A visit in late May. Just a weekend. Just the three of us. He would bring the baby and we'd take it slowly. I didn't ask if Lauren would come. He didn't offer. It wasn't necessary. In preparation, I reopened the guest room, but not the one Lauren had stayed in. I converted the sunroom, rearranged the furniture, brought in a crib from the attic, dusted off the old rocking chair. I filled the shelves with children's books I used to read to Michael. Not to recreate the past, but to reclaim it. And I wrote again. But not about betrayal. I began writing about resilience, about aging, about women like me who had been dismissed for their silence only to discover that silence was never emptiness. It was strategy. It was strength held back until it could be used with purpose. The stories flowed like spring rivers, fast and clear. One evening, Ruth visited with lemon bars and wine. We sat on the porch, wrapped in shawls, watching the sky bruise into evening. "I heard he wrote you," she said, sipping her wine. "He did. Are you going to see him?" I shook my head. No. Seeing him again would be like rereading a book I already understood. I know the ending. I don't need to go back. Ruth nodded slowly. "You're not the same woman who baked 4 pies and bit her tongue to keep the peace." "No," I said. "I'm the woman who serves the truth in porcelain." She laughed, then toasted me with her glass. "To truth, then, even when it burns." We drank, and that night I slept soundly. No nightmares, no ghosts, just the rhythmic breath of spring wind through the open window. May bloomed in full color. The cherry tree I'd planted months earlier unfurled its first soft pink blossoms, delicate and tentative, as if asking permission to exist. I stood beneath it each morning with my tea, watching the petals tremble in the breeze. They reminded me of my own reemergence, quiet, subtle, but rooted. And then they arrived. Michael's car pulled up the drive just before noon on a Saturday. I stepped onto the porch as he rounded the vehicle, carefully unstrapping a tiny bundle from the car seat in the back. His hands were steady movements, protective, reverent. "She's heavier than she looks," he said, walking toward me. "Good. Strong is better than pretty," I replied. He smiled and placed the baby in my arms. For a moment, I forgot everything. The betrayal, the silence, the pain. All of it blurred into the periphery as I stared down at a pair of wide, blinking eyes. She yawned, unconcerned by history, her fists curled tightly beneath her chin like 2 declarations of life itself. "What's her name?" I asked. "Evelyn Grace." I blinked. "Grace." Michael looked down. "I remembered you once said it was your grandmother's name. The one who taught you how to write." I nodded slowly. "Yes, Grace Amelia Tolland. She taught me how to make a story out of survival. She deserves that lineage," he said. We went inside. The afternoon unfolded gently. I showed him the nursery and the sunroom, how I'd moved the furniture, repainted the window trim, added a mobile of stars above the crib. Michael was quiet, running his hand along the edge of the cradle like it was a fragile relic. "I didn't expect you to do all this," he said. "I didn't do it for you," I answered. "I did it for her." I held Evelyn most of the afternoon, rocked her, sang softly the lullaby my grandmother once sang to me. "Come rest, little star, the night is kind." Michael watched me with an expression I couldn't name. Part awe, part shame, part hope. "I keep thinking he said that I should have protected you from all of this. From him. From her." "You weren't meant to," I said. "You were meant to live your own life. Sometimes we don't know we're in a story until it ends." And sometimes, he whispered, we're the villain in someone else's story before we know better. I looked up at him holding his daughter. "Then let this be your redemption." He stayed the whole weekend. We didn't talk about Everett. We didn't speak Lauren's name. We didn't dissect the past. It hung quietly in the background like an old coat we'd taken off and left by the door. Unforgotten, but no longer worn. Instead, we focused on Evelyn. We took slow walks through the woods behind the house, sat on the porch and watched the wind carry petals from the cherry tree across the lawn like confetti. I showed Michael where he used to dig up worms and pretend they were dragons. He laughed, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years. That night, while Evelyn slept in the crib, he and I sat by the fire. "I don't think she knows how much damage she did," he said suddenly. "She might," I replied. "But she probably thinks the damage is what the rest of us deserved." He looked into the flames. "She said I was weak." That I let people walk over me. That you made me soft. Did she? No, he said. You made me see. And I hated that. Because once you see, you can't unsee. We sat in silence a long time. Then I said, you know what she feared most? He turned. She feared a woman who didn't need to scream to win. He nodded. When they left the next morning, Michael hugged me tightly. Not the way a child clings to a parent, but the way a grown man leans into someone who helped him survive. Evelyn stirred in her sleep as I kissed her forehead. As they drove off, I didn't wave. I just stood at the gate and watched until the car disappeared down the road lined with blooming trees. Then I turned back to the house, to the writing desk, to the story that was no longer just mine, because now there was someone to inherit it. And I would not leave her a tale of silence. I would leave her one of quiet power. By mid-June, my days took on a rhythm that felt almost sacred. I woke before the sun crested the ridge behind the house, brewed strong tea, opened the windows wide to let in birdsong and breeze, wrote until my hands ached, then walked the garden paths, barefoot soil soft beneath my heels. It was a kind of life that no one else had designed for me, a life I'd slowly reclaimed one quiet act at a time. The notebook that had once chronicled betrayal had been retired, its final page filled. In its place, I began a new one, leather-bound and deep green, embossed with a single word in gold. Legacy. This time, the story wasn't about them. It was about her, Evelyn Grace. Each page was a letter, a lesson, a warning, a wonder. I wanted her to know everything the world would try to take from her, and everything no one could ever touch. And with each page, I wrote something soften in me, not weakness but gentleness. Not for the past, but for what came next. Then one day a letter arrived. From Lauren. It was postmarked from a town 2 hours north. No return address. Just her name. I debated whether to open it. Then I did. Madeline. This isn't an apology. I know better than to pretend that words can undo what I did. But I need you to know this. When Evelyn was born, something inside me broke open. I looked into her eyes and saw everything I had tried to manipulate, control, destroy. And suddenly, it didn't make sense anymore. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I hope that one day when Evelyn is older and asks where she came from, you'll tell her the truth. Not to shame her, but so she never lives in lies the way I did. I'm working. I'm sober. I'm alone. I need to take care of her if I can't. You were always stronger than I wanted to admit. I read it 3 times, then folded it, filed it in a drawer, not in legacy, not among the keepsakes, somewhere neutral, somewhere that didn't grant it weight, but didn't pretend it never existed. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't pity her either. I simply understood her now. She had mistaken dominance for love, deceit for survival, and silence for approval. But people change. Sometimes in pain, sometimes in birth, and sometimes in the echo of what they almost lost. That afternoon, I sat under the cherry tree with my notebook and wrote Evelyn a new page. Sweet girl. One day, someone will lie to you. Someone you love. Someone you trusted. It will hollow you out, and you'll think the emptiness is permanent. It's not, but here's the truth. No one tells you. The person who hurts you the most might not be your enemy forever. And the one who tells you the truth may not always do it with kindness, but with clarity. When that day comes, remember this. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And the woman who raised your father will always be here to remind you of both. Love. Grandma Madeline. When I finished, I closed the notebook, leaned back in the grass, and stared up into the soft fluttering of petals above. I realized something then. That tree had once been bare. Just a stick in the ground, lifeless. Now it held shade. Now it held stories. And soon it would bear fruit. So would I. Summer deepened like a long exhale. The garden bloomed in unruly waves, roses, lavender, wild mint, and I let it. I no longer trimmed beauty into obedience. I let things grow wild, reach tangle bloom beyond what was expected. The way I wished I had allowed myself to bloom decades ago. I found that I smiled more now. Not performative smiles, the kind women are taught to wear like armor, but real ones. Ones that started deep in the chest and rose without needing approval. One Sunday, Ruth and I drove to the lake. We packed sandwiches and lemonade like two schoolgirls escaping chores. We sat under a tree near the water, her knitting in her lap, my notebook beside me. "You've changed," she said matter-of-factly. I nodded. "So have you?" She laughed. "I've changed into a woman with two new knees and a refusal to explain myself to fools. But you've become dangerous." "Why dangerous?" "Because you know the truth now, and you're no longer afraid to say it out loud." We were quiet for a moment, the sound of wind across the water folding over us like a hymn. Then she added, "Do you ever miss him?" "Which one?" "Either." I looked out at the water. "I miss the versions of them that never truly existed," I said. "The husband who would have stood beside me instead of behind my back. The son who could have seen sooner, but I don't miss them now." She nodded. "Grief doesn't always come from what we lose. Sometimes it comes from realizing what we never had to begin with." That night back home, I opened my notebook again and began a new letter. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, then you've begun to understand what love really is. Not the kind they sell you in stories, but the kind that survives betrayal and keeps breathing. Love is not passive. It isn't silent when harm arrives wrapped in charm. One day you may be asked to choose between peace and truth. If I taught your father anything, I hope it was this. Truth is peace, eventually, but peace without truth is just anesthesia. You deserve more than numbness. You deserve clarity. With everything I am, Grandma Madeline." A few days later, Michael sent a photo. Evelyn, in a yellow sun hat drooling down her chin, sitting in his lap at the park. Her smile wide and uninhibited. His eyes brighter than I'd seen them in years. I printed the photo and placed it on the refrigerator beside an old magnet shaped like a typewriter. Family. Not the family I once had, but the family I now chose. At the end of the month, I received a letter from Daniel Cho. A proposal. A small publishing press local independent was interested in a collection of personal essays I had submitted anonymously. I'd titled them Porcelain Truths. Daniel had handled the legal side per my request, never revealing my identity. They'd like to meet the author, he wrote. No pressure. I laughed when I read it, then stared at the envelope a long while. The woman who once let lies eat her from the inside now had something to say, and the world was finally ready to listen. I called Daniel the next morning. "Tell them yes," I said. He paused. "Will you publish under your name?" I looked out the window at the cherry tree now bearing small blushing fruit. "Yes," I said. "It's time." Late August came with golden light and quiet certainty. The evenings were cooler now, and the shadows fell longer across the floorboards. The house creaked differently, as if settling not from age, but from peace. Even the wind at night carried less bite, brushing through the curtains like an old friend instead of a warning. One morning, I received a package on the porch. No note. Just a brown paper parcel tied in twine. Inside, a first edition copy of the collected works of Grace Amelia Tolland, my grandmother. It smelled of old paper and lemon oil. I hadn't seen this edition in decades. Inside the front cover, a single line was underlined in pencil. "We are not fragile because we break. We are fragile because we pretend not to." There was no signature, but I knew who had sent it. Lauren. I sat with it for a long time, running my fingers across the faded type. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that we all carry our own wreckage and sometimes we learn to live better in its aftermath. That night, I finished the final letter in Evelyn's notebook. Evelyn Grace. By the time you read this, you'll be older than the woman I was when I thought I knew what strength meant. You'll have learned that love is not something owed, nor is it something earned through silence. You'll have questions. About your mother, your father, about me. I won't pretend I was perfect, but I will promise you this. The day your mother whispered that lie into my ear, she thought she was breaking me. She didn't know I had been broken before and rebuilt better. Not louder. Not meaner, just clearer. And that's my gift to you. Not survival, but vision. Not power over others, but power within yourself. There will come a day when someone will try to define you by your silence. On that day, I hope you remember me. And I hope you don't whisper. I hope you roar. Always yours, Grandma Madeline. I placed the notebook in a wooden box along with the photograph of me holding baby Michael, the letter from Lauren, and the silver pen nib necklace Everett never saw me wear. A small inheritance not of wealth, but of witness. A legacy not of lineage, but of clarity. In September, I sat on a panel at the local library, now published, now seen. I wore a simple green dress and my grandmother's brooch. I spoke softly, but the audience leaned in as if every word was a stone dropping into still water. A woman in the back asked, "Do you regret anything?" I paused. "No," I said, "but I mourn the time I spent trying to be palatable instead of powerful." Afterward, a young woman approached me, 20-something, trembling. "My mother always told me I talked too much," she said. I smiled. "Then speak louder." She did. So did others. And I kept writing, not because I needed to be heard, but because I had finally learned how to speak from the center of my truth. And I would never go quiet again. Sometimes I still sit by the fireplace and think of that Christmas night, the one where everything shattered. The one where my daughter-in-law leaned in close, her voice honeyed with malice, and whispered the sentence meant to unravel me. "I'm pregnant with your husband's child." It doesn't haunt me anymore, because now I know the truth wasn't a sword, it was a mirror. And when I held it up to each of them, they saw exactly who they were. But more importantly, so did I. I saw the woman I had become, not the dutiful wife, not the quiet mother, not the invisible matriarch, but the keeper of truths, the one who watched, waited, and delivered justice without raising her voice. Grace isn't about forgiveness, it's about precision. And peace is not the absence of conflict, but the decision to stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. My granddaughter will grow up in a world where women are still told to smile through betrayal and swallow discomfort for the sake of appearances. But not in my house, not under my tree, not on my watch, because I left her something no lie can destroy. A story written by a woman who refused to go quietly. A story not of revenge, but of reclamation. If you're reading this, whoever you are, wherever you are, I hope you remember this much. Silence is not submission. Stillness is not weakness. And truth, when wielded with grace, is the sharpest gift you'll ever give. Madeline Fern Whitaker. The woman they underestimated,